Hey guys, welcome to Woodburn students. It is Wednesday, it's our weekly devotion. My name is Jason. I am the youth and young adult pastor at Woodburn Baptist. I'm so excited to be with you guys again. I know it's virtually, but I miss you guys and I'm glad to be able to be with you. I can't wait till we can be together in person, hopefully soon. Let's keep an eye out for updates as June is going to come to a close. Hopefully in July we'll be able to make some steps to get together, and so keeping our eye out for that. But today we're going to be looking at a story that you guys have heard probably several times, a parable that you're familiar with, but I want us to look at it in light of things that are going on today. We're looking at Luke chapter 10, and we're starting in verse 30, and this is the idea of being a neighbor to those around us, and how as believers Jesus calls us to be different and to be a neighbor to everyone, no matter who they are, what they've said, what they've done, what you think they've done, but to be a neighbor and to love them. When I was a kid, we would always go on family vacations every year. And one particular year, I don't remember, I was around 10 to 12, somewhere around that age, and we went to the Grand Canyon. And first of all, that was a very long drive. I do not recommend driving to the Grand Canyon, but that's what we did. We spent, a week in the car and got to see the Grand Canyon. It was pretty awesome, and we were not prepared for a hike, but we decided that we were going to walk down into the Grand Canyon. If you've ever been there, there are probably several trails, but there's a main kind of a trail that zigzags down into the canyon. And it was hot. It was a hot day. It was summertime. And we didn't prepare as far, we were passing people with supply bags and water and all this stuff. And we had like little water bottles, couple. And I just remember being thirsty and hot. And I remember my sister wanting water, and I probably said it out loud, but I know I was thinking, no, 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 she can't have any because, what if there's not enough? As I think about that, isn't that typically our response to situations? We worry about ourselves. How is this going to affect me? How is this going to impact me? Is this going to affect my plans or my desires moving forward? But Jesus teaches us to look at things differently instead of looking at it from our own perspectives, but just looking at any situation with love, especially when it relates to people, to look at them with love, not looking at them and judging based on anything that they have done or said, or someone around them has done or said, but to just love them. How different would our world look if we loved our neighbors truly as ourselves? And that's where this parable comes in. Leading up to this point that we're going to read, Luke chapter 10, there's a religious expert. He's trying to trip Jesus up. They've been talking about how, we're supposed to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, strength, and all that stuff. And we're supposed to love our neighbor as ourself. And Jesus, agrees with him. But when the man asked Jesus, well, who is our neighbor then? If we're supposed to love our neighbor, this person as ourself, who exactly are we supposed to love as ourself? So Jesus tells him this parable. And now keep in mind that this parable for us is a story, but for them in this moment, it was really religiously charged, it was racially charged, it was politically charged, so it was bringing up a lot of tension. But let's pick up in verse 30, if you read that with me. Luke chapter 10, verse 30, it says, "In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, he passed by on the other side." Now at this point it was getting tense because these are the religious leaders that Jesus is talking to. He's kind of calling them out and throwing them under the bus at this point. So they're tense, they're on edge. And then verse 33, he says, "But a Samaritan." Now, not all translations say "but," some say "then," but that transitional word is extremely important here because it lets them know that now there's a change, there's a shift happening, and the Samaritan is not the same as these religious leaders. He is now becoming the hero. And this was shocking to them. This was outrageous because they viewed Samaritans as much less than. They were traitors. They were religiously offensive to them, and they went out of their way to avoid being around Samaritans. And so it was something that shocked them for Jesus to even say this, that a Samaritan might be a good person. It'd be like me telling this story today and saying, Pastor Tim walked straight by this person in need, and Pastors Rod and Nicole walked straight past this person in need, but then, Donald Trump comes along and is the hero. Some of you might have gotten tense at the mention of that name, Donald Trump. Some of you, it might be Nancy Pelosi or something like that. But you could almost put any name, especially a famous person's name, into this section. It would spark some kind of feeling for somebody, right? At the mention of that name, someone reacts, whether it's a good reaction, positive, or a negative reaction. And maybe something triggered in you at the mention of a name or the thought of a name. But this is kind of just a glimpse at what this expert that Jesus was talking to would have been feeling at the mention of a Samaritan being a hero. So let's go on. It says in verse 33, "But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him, and he bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. And then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. He said, 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I will even pay you for any extra expenses that you may have.'" So the Samaritan went above and beyond. He went way beyond the minimum of just checking on this person. He literally did everything that he could to this stranger that was in need, and he even promised to do more if it was necessary, if he needed it later. Verse 36 says, "Which of these three do you think was the neighbor to a man who fell into the hands of robbers?" So the expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." And Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." So you see what Jesus did here? He pushed all the buttons of race, politics, religion, and then he flipped the question. The expert was saying, "Who's my neighbor?" And he was, trying to draw the focus on how do I classify all these people to know how I should love them. And so instead of Jesus, drawing into that, Jesus flipped the question. He just said, "Who is the neighbor?" I am called to be a neighbor, right? You are called to be a neighbor to anyone that we encounter. Instead of trying to classify others into categories as to how much we should love them, we should just consider everybody as a neighbor. Consider ourselves. I'm a neighbor to you, so I'm going to treat you as I should. I'm going to treat you as I would treat myself. And that's the difference in, we tend to, as humans, to classify people based on either something that we know that they've done or said, or something that we might assume that they have done or said. And then we apply that amount of love that we think is necessary. When in reality, Jesus just calls us to love everyone, to treat every single person that we encounter as a neighbor, no matter what they've done, no matter what they've said, no matter who they are associated with, no matter what we think that they have done or said. We should treat them all as our neighbor. And it's like we have this inclination to look at ourselves and how this is going to affect ourselves, like me in the Grand Canyon, thinking if I let her drink all the water, we won't have any water. But in reality, it's not about how this should impact me. It's how does this affect those around me? How does this affect other people? Throughout the New Testament, Jesus tells his followers, which we are his followers, he tells us to put the needs of others first, right? To care for the hurt, the needy, the sick, the homeless. And he tells us to love our enemies. Go that extra mile. That's the way Jesus approaches life, it's to not think about me, not think about ourselves, but to be a neighbor to everyone and to think about them first. He calls us to go and do likewise. We worry about things that are temporary. We worry about the economy. Who can we blame for what we're going through right now? Is neighboring people worth the sacrifice of having to make myself a little bit uncomfortable? But Jesus calls us to do that. He calls us to be a neighbor. Go beyond the minimum. Go beyond what is required and empathize with those who are suffering, right? In ways that we don't understand, ways that we don't get. Ask the question, how can I demonstrate Christ right now? In this situation, how can I demonstrate Christ? Do my words hurt my neighbor? Do my words hurt this person who grew up differently than me? Do my words hurt them because based on race or politics or religion? Do my words hurt them? What does my focus on money say about me? What does the conversations that people overhear me saying, what do the words that are being said tell them about me? And then do they point them to God, or do they pull them away from God? Do my posts online build walls or create bridges, or do they tear people down? So what does neighboring look like? It looks like loving God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And loving God means loving others. It looks like loving others the way that Christ loved them, the way that Christ loves us. It means sacrifice sometimes. It means empathy, trying to, you may never understand what someone is going through, but you can have empathy for what they are experiencing. Instead of outrage, have a degree of understanding, or at least try to understand. Sacrifice my security, my popularity, my status, my finances, physical safety for the sake of others. It means being a neighbor to everyone, not just the ones we think deserve it. Um, so if you're not neighboring well, that's my challenge for you this week. How are you neighboring? Are you neighboring well? Are you neighboring at all? Um, if you're not neighboring well, how can you love God well? Because those two are super tightly just together. They're knitted together almost perfectly because God loves all people. So if we are to love God, we should love all of God's creation. Um, you know, and so think, how are you neighboring? What is one way, whether it's big, or small, doesn't matter. That the size is not important. But what's one way that you can neighbor today? What's a way that you can neighbor this week? How can you be a neighbor to someone in person? I know it's difficult right now with the social distancing, but how can you still be a neighbor to someone in need? How can you be a neighbor online? How can you be respectful to others online? How can you be a neighbor with your family, those who you live with, who you see all the time? How can you be a neighbor to maybe the stranger that you see at the grocery store, with your teammates, with the politician that you disagree with? It's one thing to be a neighbor to those we think alike, or those we think like, but it's a totally different thing to be a neighbor to those we disagree with, or those who maybe even have hurt us. So how can we move forward? How can you today move forward and begin to neighbor well, to be a neighbor to everyone in your life, no matter what they've done or said? That's my encouragement to you guys, is to think like Jesus thinks, not about ourselves, but about others. Put others first. This Samaritan not only stopped and cared for this person, but he took care of their wound. He tried to heal them. He brought them somewhere. He put them on his own donkey. He brought them to an inn and cared for them throughout the night. And then when he had to go on and continue working, he made sure that he paid for the innkeeper to take care of them. And he even said, "Hey, if it costs more than this, I will come back and I will pay that." He didn't just care for them in the moment. He cared for them, for this person ongoing, until their wound had healed. Can you imagine the world that we could live in if we cared for people, first of all, like we should, but if we cared for them not only in that moment, but until they have actually healed? We would live in a completely different world than we do now. So that's my challenge for you guys, to pray for that, to ask God to show you how you're neighboring and how you can improve that, and then begin to make those steps to do that. So I love you guys. Again, I can't wait to see you in person. If you need me, call me, text me, and or message me on Instagram or Facebook. I would love to catch up, or help you, or talk to you, whatever you need. So I love you guys. I will see you soon. And until then, God bless.